I was about 6 years old when I first saw the movie Darby O'Gill and the Little People. All these years later, two things really stick out in my mind.
Oh, she is my dear, my darling one, her eyes so sparkling full of fun. No other can match the likes of her.
James Bond pretending to be Irish and singing a love song, and
The Banshee!
yeah, the Banshee scared the crap out of me in this G-rated family film. And when I got into gaming, I found this. Seems I wasn't the only person scarred by Walt Disney's Irish pastiche. So let's see. The groaning spirit, or Banshee, is the spirit of an evil female elf, a very rare thing indeed. The spirit returns to harm the living. It is only found in desolate countrysides, moors, etc. Evil female elf? In American pop culture, the Banshee is depicted as a screeching specter, an Irish grim reaper come to harvest souls, possibly thanks to the Disney film. But the original folklore is far more complicated and much more interesting. The Banshee is associated with a mythological being called the Morrigan, or Morrigan, whose three aspects include a maiden, a matron, and a crone, whose description is much like the Banshee of later folklore. She would also take the form of a black bird and seems to have inspired the Raven Queen deity in modern Dungeons & Dragons. While it's impossible to know for sure, one possible origin of the Banshee were the keeners, women hired by important Irish families as professional mourners, paid in alcohol to wail and keen for the dead. Legend has it that the church frowned upon this tradition and its pagan roots, cursing the keeners in the eyes of God, forcing them to forever wail when a member of the clan was about to die. This is why, despite the pop culture depiction of the Banshee, the apparition is not usually seen as evil or malevolent in the traditions of Irish and Scottish folklore.
Irish people, they weren't afraid of the Banshee. Most people heard the Banshee rather than saw the Banshee. But I've recorded people who actually saw the Banshee. Most heard, few saw. I've recorded a few people who did actually see her, and the description they gave me of her was tall, thin woman with long grey hair.
The pop culture ghost version of the Banshee probably comes from the use of the word spirit, not understanding how loosely that word could once be applied to pretty much anything not of the normal mortal world. The name comes from the Gaelic root words bane, meaning woman, and she, which refers to the fairy people of Irish folklore. Whether cursed funeral performers or spectral fey warnings of death, one thing all versions of the legend have in common is the wail of the Banshee.
And immediately there was this wail. Well, he said it froze their blood.
Sometimes it's presented as something feminine. Other times, it's something rather melodic. And other times, yeah, that's downright unsettling. Sounds a bit like the Nazgul from The Lord of the Rings. Kind of easy to understand how you'd hear that sound and think it's the warning of death coming to collect a soul. So what exactly does the Banshee do, according to legend?
The Banshee is a harbinger, fancy word, but she's the one who warns certain Irish families of death. of a coming death in the family.
If we look to more literary sources instead of the oral record, we have examples of banshees inspiring poets and acting as guardians for noble houses and mourning when great chieftains or kings die, but after they die, not preemptively.
One interesting detail that's repeated in many stories in the legends is the banshee's comb. She's often depicted as combing her long hair, even if she doesn't make a sound. This is something that even Uncle Walt got right if you look closely.
Keep away! Keep away!
See? There it is. And if you believe in this sort of thing, you never try to take the banshee's comb, or even pick a stray comb off the ground. The traditional folklore has few instances of the banshee acting violently, except when someone steals her comb. And she is strong enough to bend iron. Fairy, spirit, or whatever her true nature, she is mostly around to let people know that someone is about to die. But the messenger always gets the blame, so the banshee's reputation has only suffered in translation to pop culture, including Dungeons & Dragons. In the Monster Manual for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, 1st edition, the groaning spirit is that of an evil female elf. I assume that's the easiest compromise between a fairy and a spirit, and made the most sense for the world the game portrayed. Magic was required to damage the banshee at all, and while its physical attack was weak, it had a once-per-day wail, or keening, that could only be done in darkness that would instantly kill any characters who heard it and failed a saving throw versus magic. This definitely seems to come more from the Disney depiction.
The Banshee!
Maybe it's just the wind.
It's the wail of the Banshee. The same as I heard the night that Kitty's mother was taken. She'll be destroyed entirely!
Though even in Darby O'Gill, the Banshee is more like the Grim Reaper come to collect someone already doomed to die, rather than directly causing the death in the first place. But D&D needed monsters, so it made sense to turn the Banshee's wail into a devastating attack. While the stats changed in later editions of the game, the basic concept of the ghost of an elf woman inflicting death upon adventurers with her once-a-day scream has remained consistent. The 5th edition version is also so scary that even looking upon her can frighten characters into running away. So in folklore, the Banshee isn't good or bad and usually doesn't harm anyone directly, while the D&D version is an evil elf ghost who screams warriors and wizards to death, instantly. And not one mention about the comb. Oh, and remember that horrifying shriek from earlier? This is an ordinary barn owl, the video taken just down the road from my office in North Georgia. Some folklorists believe the barn owl's screech is the origin of the Banshee's soul-piercing wail. Now save versus magic. Or die.